So hi, my name is Emily Buckley. I think I've met a few before and potentially spoken about SIM at the IGS. So today's talk is slightly different. It's about how do we run a scenario and basically my experience with running scenarios and in different environments. And most importantly, when to hit the red button and stop it. So what I'll be talking about is basically where can you run a sim? And I suppose my experience mainly lies with running it in a simulation lab and also a small bit with in-situ simulation. How do you run a sim scenario in each of these locations? How do you set the scene for that, which has been kind of touched on already today? And how do you keep things on track and progress it and get people from A to B and to our destination? Obviously, there's always going to be some pitfalls but thankfully there are solutions to these. And as I said, we need to know when to stop the scenario. So where can you run a sim? And the answer is literally anywhere and what is mainly available to you. So if you have a dedicated space or even just an empty room, that might be enough. You could run it in your clinic room. In resus is obviously very popular. Arguably just having 2 chairs in a room, and if you 2 people that are like very attuned to what they need to do, and they can make that very realistic and increases in called context fidelity, and that can be realistic enough to run a sim. Or if you're lucky enough to have a dedicated space, you can run it in a sim lab. So I'm just going to talk about what I know or what I've experienced in, and that's running it in an in-situ sim and also in a dedicated lab. So in-situ simulation is simulation that literally occurs in the clinical setting, so where you usually work. So this is the fastball that was ran with Shifra last year and a few other people. And as you can see, this is in a bay in ED. And it's not that like inside your lab that there's one better than the other. There really isn't. It's really just like one, what's available to you, and also what are you trying to do. So as you can see, there's here, like it's in the ED, it's a busy space, but it is a clinical environment that you're familiar with. You'll have done your nights on it, you'll be doing your call there, you probably treat patients in there. It's accessible to staff, and it's accessible not only to one discipline, but maybe to a few disciplines, which is useful. And you know, it's the equipment, or it can look like the equipment that you normally use. Obviously, there are some disadvantages, and the main thing is obviously time. So like this game might be used if ED is really busy. In-situ sim can be maybe a small bit prone to interruptions, or the timing can be delayed. So for example, when this fast was being run, an actual fast came in just before it was about to start, which I was late to it, so I thought it was already started, but it wasn't. So, and also as well, there's a big patient safety element here as well, where you don't want to be getting the sim equipment mixed up with like your real life medications. And that's really, really important if you are going to run a simulation in a dedicated clinical space. But it's definitely a good option. So then simulation in a dedicated lab, or offsite simulation, as it's sometimes called in the literature, is training in a dedicated facility that's specifically set up for sim. So you have all the gear that you need. It's away from the clinical setting, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always offsite. It could be within the campus. It could be in a dedicated room down the hall. It doesn't mean that it has to be somewhere else necessarily. But the room is set up for this. So as you can see there, it's a room that's set up for sim. There's your 2-way window. You have your mics and your cameras and stuff. So which one do you use? I suppose it's what's available to you. Sometimes if you know that, say, for example, if in your fast pathway, if, I don't know, you want to get your door to needle time down, or if there's something going wrong, maybe running it inside your ED is a good idea there. But maybe if you want to teach a specific element of, say, the fast pathway, or like at the start of the year here, we ran a sim of just the fast pathway over in simulation lab, and it was literally just so that regs and maybe senior SHOs could get used to the pathway that's here in Waterford. And how does it affect running your sim? Well, it basically, or what does this mean for being a simulation facilitator? So the basic principles are kind of the same. You're kind of a director, and you kind of watch it unfold in front of you. But a lot of the stuff is the same, and I'm going to go through each one now. So facilitating in-situ sim, sorry, Shifra, you're featuring heavily. So Shifra was the facilitator here. As you can see, it's really immersive. So you're in the scenario, you're next to people running the scenario. You're at times maybe next to your embedded simulated participants. You're next to the patient, you're next to the equipment. It's different. Sometimes your view might be obscured depending, people are moving around. It's a small space and there's a lot of people watching. As I said, you can interact directly with your ESPs, which can be good for progressing the scenario. Sometimes maybe you don't need to be doing that either. And I suppose people aren't necessarily always mic'd up, so you might not necessarily hear what's going on, or you might not hear correctly what's going on. But some things remain the same. So you still have your script and your checklist that you're trying to get through. And wrapping it up, I suppose the only difference really is that you kind of have to really make sure that you know what's going on. Because as I said, your sound and your view might be obscured, and it can be hard to get everyone's attention to say, look, this is over. Whereas it can be a small bit easier in a lab to do that. So as you can see straight away, the environment is entirely different if you're facilitating a scenario in the sim lab. You're physically outside the room, you're behind that two-way window, and you have a lot of technology at your disposal, which can be your friend and also your enemy at times. So again, you still have your script and your checklist. So you want to go through that and see if people are hitting their learning outcomes and where it's going. You have your sound and your microphones. That can be good because you can turn people up and down depending. You have a really good view, and that's what's great about facilitating sim in a lab. So you can literally see and control your vitals through really handy things like free apps and stuff. You can bring your radiology up on like that small little black screen there. You can bring up your obs, you can bring up anything you want to show people, both in the room and outside the room that are watching. And I suppose as well, you usually have a dedicated debrief space, which is important as well. It is less immersive, but that's good and bad. Like, I mean, it's probably not fair on the ESPs if you're the facilitator and you're standing right next to them and telling them to like move over there and stuff, you know, so it's maybe a good thing. Depending. And then there's this theory called voice of God, where you speak into that microphone there and you kind of direct things and say things. Usually I just tell people to stop the scenario rather than anything else. So this is basically my view when I'm sitting in behind that desk there. So as you can see, you've got a really, really good view of everything that's going on. And those cameras are kind of 360, so you can go anywhere in the room. You can turn on and off the mics. You can change the vital signs. So if it's available to you, it's a really great resource to use. So setting the scene. So the day has arrived, you've done, you've kind of gathered your faculty, everyone has their role, but on the day things can go wrong, or you know, you need to make sure that everything is still available to you. So is the computer working on the day, even though it's been working for the last 30 days? Are the iPad and the apps working? Are your cameras all working? And are your microphones working? Do they need new batteries? Always have spare batteries, that kind of thing. Check your props. So are the charts still there? Has someone taken them? Do you have all your discharge letters and medications, your OBS charts, your cardixes? I know we tend to like borrow the OBS machine from clinic rooms. So like, is that available, or is there a Clinicon? Do you have all your guidelines available for the learner? Because you are sending someone in, and even though it might be a space that we know isn't, you know, a real life scenario, it feels very real in there. And then obviously you need your scenario specific items. So we once did like a Pathfinder scenario where it was kind of set in someone's living room. So like, you know, do you have your sofa looking chair and stuff like that, and walking aids and all those kind of things. And the faculty, so is everyone that said that they were available, are they in today? Has something else come up? Are they prepared? Are they happy with knowing what their role is, and what they need to do if something goes right or wrong, or if things are too easy or too difficult? Is the time still working? Is the space still available? I suppose that's the advantage of having a dedicated lab, is it's your space and you've a lot of autonomy with it. And I don't mean kind of Dermot Banning Grand Designs way, but you can kind of create a permanent space, or you can create a permanent looking scenario. So like, once you created that living room for your Pathfinder scenario, you can put that in the storeroom next door, and you can bring that out for like another scenario where maybe the memory CNS is visiting the home, you know, so you can really do what you want with that space, which is great. As well. And I suppose just the other thing on that being a dedicated space is that I think what I have learned is that it really helps you to implement an education strategy. So like, if sim is new in a department, if you have a space, you can build around that. Whereas I suppose if it's in-situ, it might just be a standalone event and you're waiting for that space to become available. And obviously if it's safe to go ahead, and that's particularly the case in-situ, because ED is busy. So then it's showtime. So you've your space set up, you've your mics ready, everyone knows what they have to do, you've your props ready. So it's kind of lights, camera, action, and you can just sit back and relax. But unfortunately, that is not the case. So you always have to expect the unexpected, which is difficult, because as the facilitator, you need to kind of strike this fine balance of, you need to anticipate what might go wrong, and you obviously need to kind of have everyone briefed on, okay, what do we do if this goes this way or this goes that way? Or like, what if everyone's actually really, really good and we're flying it? Like, can you maybe like make things a small bit more difficult? But then you also don't want to suffocate the scenario. So you don't want to have to, you know, you can't orchestrate everything, because that's not real life, and it's certainly not real clinical life. But this has been difficult for me as a control freak. But I feel like I'm in good company with the other people in this room. So what can happen? So equipment can break down and freeze, which does happen. And I think the boundaries of my IT skills have been stretched to their limit. But anyway, I think there's some brevity there. There's always an unexpected action by the learner. And in a way that's kind of enjoyable because we sit down and we do the storyboard and we look at every avenue about where this could go and what could happen. But like, it's kind of a learning point for, everyone involved in facilitating the sim that like, at the end of the day, you can't control what people will do. And it's the same as real life. Like you don't know when you're on call what someone might do. And it's kind of a learning, it's a really good learning point. There might be a mismatch between participants' competence and scenario complexity. And I think that's been a really big learning curve for myself because I don't know what everyone else knows. And, that's what you think someone might know at a certain level isn't actually what they know, or they might be better than you think as well. So it's really hard. It goes back to that pitching at a level, which is really, really difficult. And it's really, really difficult, I think, if you're aiming it at undergrads or interns, because I think we just forget that. Participants also might not understand or accept the scenario. So like that's on us if they don't understand the scenario. Like if we haven't done our pre-brief properly, people don't know what they want to do or what they're supposed to do. They haven't been orientated to the environment. Like that's not fair to throw them into that scenario. And obviously it's going to go a bit skew-wise. Or if they don't accept the scenario, and that goes back to fidelity. So does it physically look like the space you'd be working in? And even more important than that is the context fidelity. So I have to say, the faculty that have been involved as embedded participants have been phenomenal and been so lifelike that it's been almost frightening. So, but that's good because it's like real life. And again, you kind of don't know what they're going to do either. And then obviously I'm going to make a mistake all the time. So I turn off mics, the camera has ended up on the ceiling, everyone's view has been obscured. And then that whole thing with unsuccessful time shifts. So moving the passage of time and progressing it can be quite difficult. And again, it goes back to just like making sure that everyone who is the ESP in the scenario knows what their job is. And someone's job might literally be like, okay, to tell the learner that like, you're now in OPD, you're no longer in the MDT or whatever. So it's just be prepared basically. So how do we get people from A to B? Really, and this has been touched on already this morning, the most valuable people in the room are your, are your embedded simulated participants. If they're properly briefed and they're happy with what they know they have to do, and if they see that the learner is going off course or they're doing too well and you want to maybe give them a bit of a challenge, they will successfully lead people like and hold their hand and kind of guide theoretically through or hypothetically through the scenario. And that without them, and if that's not properly done, you probably won't get to where you want to be. But these are the people that will get your scenario done. And these are, sorry, there's also other people in the room that are in these and have career consent. So that could be the patient, it could be a family member, it could be like say an A&P or a nurse who's literally handing you the guidelines, they're handing you the cardex, they're handing you the chart and saying, look at this, or what do you think of these people's medications? What do you think of their obs? That kind of thing. They might be showing you like the thrombectomy pathway. Or it could just be like a simple conversation. Maybe you don't need props. But once everyone knows what they're doing, it generally is smooth sailing. Other things you can do is your equipment can keep people on track. So if you're trying to test a pathway, like put in some defective equipment, you can ring into the lab as well as, I don't know, somebody else in the scenario and try and alter things. And probably one of the best things ever that you don't actually need to invest in because it doesn't cost money is you can get a free app on your phone to change vitals on a separate screen, so whether that be on an iPad or a laptop, and you can alter the scenario that way. So maybe someone's doing really well in the fast scenario and you're like, oh my God, they're actually flying it, which is great. But maybe we need to make it more difficult, or maybe you want to pitch it to maybe like someone who's further along in their training. So like, you can make their blood pressure really high or really low, or you can put them into fast AFib. So it's really, really great. Also, if you have a mannequin, you can speak out through the mannequin and pretend to be a patient and change the course of the sim. And then finally, how do you know when to stop it? So generally when learning outcomes are achieved, and that's why it's good, I think, when you're going through your storyboard, to start, I suppose, with your learning outcomes and always be coming back to that, because no matter what you write in your storyboard, if it's not bringing them back to their learning outcomes, you're not going to achieve anything. If time is running over, so you generally have a good idea of how long something should last. But look, for various reasons, it might go to over the time allowed. And then if you've done everything you can with your technology and ESPs, sometimes things can become circular. You don't always achieve what you want to achieve, and you can just bring a stop to it. So that's me. Thank you very much.